I'm Ariel Hart with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And so I think you've seen our poll, and it looks like half of Georgians think things are returning to normal. And among those who have not been vaccinated, 1/3 are in a wait and see mode, and half do not intend to get vaccinated. So that's about a quarter of the state do not intend to get vaccinated. What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I would try to explain, first of all, find out what the reason for their not wanting to be vaccinated, because you don't want to make things unidimensional. People have different reasons for not wanting to get vaccinated. So I would certainly not take a finger pointing attitude towards them and tell them how terrible it is that they don't want to get vaccinated, but more trying to do a conciliatory approach to try and figure out what is it about getting vaccinated that they do not want to do, and explain to them the importance, not only for themselves, for their family, but also for the what I would call a societal responsibility. Because if a person doesn't get vaccinated, and it's usually a young person who feels that they're somewhat invulnerable, and if they get infected, it's not going to make any difference to them because they unlikely will get serious consequences. And it might be in their mind that it doesn't make any difference to anybody else. And that's where they're mistaken. And that's where we've got to get to them. Because by getting infected, they are really propagating the transmission chain of the outbreak. And they're really being part of the problem. So if they think that by not getting vaccinated and getting infected, that it's no harm to anyone, including themselves, well, it may not be a direct harm to themselves, but they may be unwittingly, inadvertently, and innocently passing the infection on to someone else who would actually have a dire consequence. So we have to appeal a bit to their societal responsibility, which I'm not blaming them, but they may not even realize that there is a societal aspect to this, not just a personal in a vacuum aspect.
The only thing I would add there, I think it's interesting. People tend to operate in their own self-interest. And I think as the science continues to evolve, as we have more data that comes, it becomes pretty apparent that it's in people's best interest to not get COVID. Right? We as young, healthy people, up to 31% can have those long COVID symptoms. They can have ongoing, problems due to that COVID infection. So it's not all about hospitalization and death, even though we really want to prevent those outcomes, and these vaccines do a really good job of that. It's also just preventing folks from getting COVID, period. And I think that's one of those other areas, as people see millions and millions more individuals across the country and millions of folks, even in Georgia, getting vaccinated, they'll realize, this is safe, it's effective, and it can prevent some really bad stuff from happening.
So now I'm George Estevez with WSB TV, the television station here in Atlanta, Georgia. A question for both of you. 2/3 of Republicans who have not gotten vaccinated don't plan on getting it. So what do you say to them, and how does the medical community convince them that this is the right thing to do?
Well, the first thing I would do is try and really steer away from there being a unidimensional identity as a Republican, because there are different people within the Republican Party. And you don't want to make it a political thing. You want to say, what is the reason that you as an individual, and they are individuals, you don't want to group them all in one. I think that would be unfair to them. And find out exactly, like I said a moment ago, in answer to the other question, what is the reason? There has to be a reason not to be vaccinated. You just can't say, I don't want to get vaccinated. Why not? Do you think that it's not safe? Do you think that it's not effective? Or do you think it doesn't make any difference to anybody except yourself, and you don't want anybody telling you what to do, as opposed to getting them to understand, as I just said and as Cameron just said, the importance to themselves, but also the importance to society of why it's important to get vaccinated. And I would appeal to them as an individual and not as a Republican. Just make sure you get them out of that political classification. That's really not helpful.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that honestly, this isn't a Republican vaccine or a Democratic vaccine. It's a vaccine for for all adults who've been able to have access, and now an increasing number of younger people. And so there are prominent Republicans who've been vaccinated. I think we can point to those as examples of, even across political ideology, we recognize the science is what's driving folks to protect themselves. And so I think it's absolutely right. The more we harp on this idea that political identities are either more or less likely to get vaccinated, the more we miss the point, which is that this virus doesn't care about your political party, and we're trying to protect against the virus.
It looks like as of this week in Georgia, only 25% or so of people have been fully vaccinated, and about 35% have received at least one dose. That's worse than even the rest of the country. Do you have any understanding or thoughts about why Georgia may be doing so poorly, even compared to the rest of the country? And what does it mean for a place like Georgia if we don't get to herd immunity or even past 50%?
Well, it is very clear. We have seen this over and over again, that as long as you have vulnerable people in your community, in your society, with the virus still, and viruses do that when left to their own devices, they will find vulnerable people. And if in fact you don't have a substantial proportion of your population vaccinated, any kind of a veil of protection over the whole community is not there. So there really is a significant risk. We're talking about numbers that we would like to see would be 70% of the population having received at least one dose by the 4th of July. There's no reason why we can't attain that throughout all communities in the country, because when you do get to that level, then it is very likely that you're going to be able to really take some important steps towards pulling back on the public health restrictions that we all want to be free of. We all want to get back to some degree of normality. And we find it somewhat paradoxical, because I believe, because I've spoken to many of them, that the very people who don't want to get vaccinated are the ones that don't like the public health restrictions. The easiest way to get the public health restrictions pulled back on is to have a very high level of vaccination in your community.
And as to the question about Georgia, why do you think Georgia stands so low among the other states? And are there any lessons in that as to what Georgia can do differently?
Well, it's important to keep in mind every state is different, and there are different dynamics. There are different dynamics between urban communities. But what I want to remind folks of is that over the last 7 days, we've had an average of more than 2 million people across the country getting vaccinated each day. And so the story is not written. It's not told. There will continue to be, lots more Georgians who are getting vaccinated. And I think that when the story is written, in the end, we're going to see a lot more people vaccinated. Some of that is going to happen with vaccines, being in primary care offices, because that might be more convenient and more appropriate for folks in Georgia than some of the large mass vaccination sites. We know that the large community vaccination center in Atlanta has been having millions of folks coming, or just millions of folks interested, I should say, rather. And we've had thousands of doses in single days. And so the story is not written. I think we'll continue to see vaccinations in Georgia. I know there's a lot of energy and a lot of passion and commitment from the public health officials. And so I think we'll see how it goes, but we're going to keep pushing and doing everything we can.
So we have about 2.5 minutes left. We have the viewer question here from Tiffany. If I'm a COVID long hauler, still have active antibodies, what effects will the vaccine have on me? And if it's lying dormant, would I reinfect myself?
Well, you should get vaccinated, even if you have been formerly previously infected. There's no doubt about that. Everyone should get vaccinated. There are very, very firm data that indicate that the response of vaccination in a person who has recovered from COVID is orders of magnitude better than the actual response to just recovering from infection. So the boost you get with a vaccine is going to be very good in protecting you from any type of a chance of reinfection. Also, there's anecdotal data, and it's only anecdotal because they haven't been the study, that vaccination in some people actually improves the symptoms of long COVID. So there's a double advantage there. One, to really protect you against reinfection, and two, the possibility that you might alleviate some of the symptoms of long COVID.
Dr. Webb?
Yeah, nothing to add there. I think that's spot on.
And so, Dr. Fauci, one of the questions that we hear most often from people who are hesitant is concerns about the length of time it took or didn't take to develop the vaccines. You sat last year in the White House at a table with the president addressing the heads of the pharmaceutical companies, emphasizing that it would be unprecedented, incredible to be able to develop a vaccine in a year. You said maybe in a year, and yet it was less than a year. That made an impact, and our viewers, our readers over and over tell us, I'm a little bit concerned that they rushed it. What would you say to them?
No, it wasn't rushed. The results of getting a vaccine into the arms of people within 11 months from the identification of the virus is a reflection of the decades of extraordinarily exquisite scientific advances that antedated the actual epidemic itself. The platform technology for the vaccine, the development of the immunogen, and then also testing a vaccine in the middle of a very, very big outbreak. Because when you have a big outbreak, you get an answer very, very quickly when you're testing a vaccine. So even though we started the phase 1 trial 65 days after we knew about the vaccine, the phase 3 trial was started on July 27th, and there was so much infection in the country that you got your answer very quickly. It was not rushed at all. It was a combination of years of scientific and discoveries and investment, as well as the circumstances of testing a vaccine in the middle of an outbreak.